when 9-year-old Cora Tillman pressed a hand-painted cardboard sign against the chain-link fence at the edge of the Thunder Valley Motorcycle Rally in rural Tennessee on a sweltering Saturday afternoon in late July and held it up with both arms, shaking from the effort. She wasn't sure anyone would stop. She wasn't sure anyone would even look. The sign was crooked, and the letters had run in places where her tears had fallen on the paint while she was making it that morning, sitting on the floor of a gas station bathroom with a stolen marker and a piece of cardboard she'd found in a dumpster outside. But the words were clear enough. Please find my sister. She's been missing for 2 days. Her name is Lily. She is 7. Please. What happened in the next 4 hours would pull 400 bikers away from cold beer and live music, and the particular freedom of a summer rally would transform a festive gathering into the most organized search operation the county sheriff's department had ever witnessed from civilians, and would bring a small girl home from a place she never should have been in the first place. But it started with one child, a piece of cardboard, and the moment a road captain named Vincent Rook Calloway looked up from tightening his saddlebag straps and saw her standing there at the fence like the loneliest person in the world. The Thunder Valley Motorcycle Rally happened every year on the last weekend of July at a fairground outside a small town in Middle Tennessee that had no particular reason for being famous except for this. 3 days of bikes and bands and the kind of community that formed when people who understood the road gathered in one place and remembered why they rode. There were vendors and food trucks and a custom bike competition that drew entries from 6 states. There were old-timers who'd been coming since the rally's founding and young riders who'd made it their first big event and everyone in between. On a good year, attendance topped 2,000. This was a good year. Vincent Rook Calloway was 47 years old, road captain for the Blue Ridge Sentinels MC out of Asheville, North Carolina, a broad-shouldered man with a dark beard going silver at the jaw, and the kind of permanently sun-darkened forearms that came from decades of riding without a jacket in summer. He'd earned his road name from a chess piece, not because he was particularly strategic, though he was, but because a brother had once said he moved like a rook. Straight lines, no nonsense, unstoppable once he'd decided on a direction. He'd served 8 years in the Army, 2 tours in places that rearranged the way a man looked at the world, and had been with the Sentinels for 17 years since. The club ran veteran support programs, organized fundraiser rides for pediatric cancer wards, and had a reputation for showing up when communities needed something heavy lifted. Rook had driven the van at flood relief efforts, helped rebuild a church after a fire, ridden in more than 40 memorial processions for fallen first responders. He was not a man who looked for trouble, but he was absolutely a man who recognized it when it was standing at a fence holding a cardboard sign. He saw her because he was always the one who paid attention to the edges. It was a road captain habit. When you're responsible for moving a formation of bikes through traffic and weather and all the variables the highway throws at you, you learn to track the periphery. You don't stare at the thing directly in front of you. You watch everything. So while most of the people near the fence were focused on the main stage where a blues band was setting up, or on the row of custom Harleys glinting in the afternoon sun, Rook caught the small figure in his peripheral vision and turned his head. The girl was maybe 9 or 10 years old. She was wearing a yellow t-shirt that had a cartoon sun on it, cut-off denim shorts, and sandals that were too flimsy for the gravel that covered the fairground perimeter. Her hair was dark and tangled like she'd slept on it wrong and hadn't had the chance or the presence of mind to brush it. She was standing on the outside of the fence, which meant she wasn't a rally attendee, and she was holding up a piece of cardboard with both arms like it weighed more than it did. Her face was doing something complicated. She was trying to look composed and failing completely. Rook walked toward her without making the decision consciously. It was the same automatic movement that made him pull over on highways when he saw a bike broken down on the shoulder. You saw something that needed attention, and you went toward it. Simple. He crouched down when he got close, putting himself at her eye level through the fence, and he read the sign properly for the first time. Please find my sister. She's been missing for 2 days. Her name is Lily. She is 7. Please. He looked at the girl's face. Her eyes were reddened and swollen from crying that had happened a long time ago, and then again more recently, and her lower lip had that faint trembling that meant she was barely holding the current wave back. There was a smear of dried paint on her left hand in 3 different colors, which told him she'd made the sign herself, and the cardboard had soft wrinkle lines in it from where she'd gripped it too hard. "What's your name?" he asked her. His voice came out the way it always did with children, quieter and lower than his normal register, the way you'd speak near something fragile. "Cora," she said. "Cora Tillman. Cora." He said her name back to her like it mattered, because it did. "I'm Rook. Tell me about your sister." And she did. She told him with the particular desperate efficiency of a child who had been trying to tell adults something important and kept being patted on the head and redirected. The words came fast and in order, like she'd rehearsed them because she had, lying awake the night before going over every detail in case she ever found someone who would listen. Her sister's name was Lily. Lily was 7 years old. Lily had dark hair like Cora's and a gap between her 2 front teeth and a stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere named Biscuit. 2 days ago, Friday morning, they had been at a community pool in town with their mother. Their mother had run to the parking lot to get sunscreen from the car. She was gone for less than 5 minutes. When she came back, Lily was not in the water and not in the pool area and not in the bathrooms and not anywhere. And the police had been there, and the searches had happened, and their mother was at the command post they'd set up at the community center in town, which was 20 minutes from here, and Cora had come on her bicycle because she'd had an idea. She paused and looked at Rook with the expression of someone bracing for dismissal. "What was the idea?" he asked. Her eyes went to the rally grounds behind him, all the people, all the bikers. She'd heard someone at the command post say they needed more eyes on the ground, more people searching the rural roads and the creek beds and the stretches of farmland between town and the interstate. And Cora had thought about the rally. She'd ridden past it before with her dad. She knew there were hundreds of people there. People who rode motorcycles could cover more ground than people walking, she explained carefully, like she wanted to make sure the logic was airtight. They can go fast. They know the roads. And there are so many of them. Rook stared at this 9-year-old girl who had woken up that morning without her little sister, who had ridden her bicycle 20 minutes on rural roads to a motorcycle rally, who had made a sign out of trash materials and stood at the fence of a gathering of strangers and held it up with shaking arms because she had done the math and decided this was the best available option. "You biked here alone?" he asked. She nodded, not apologetically, just factually. "Mom needs to stay at the command post in case Lily comes back. And I'm old enough. I'm 9. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today and what time it is where you are, because this story is going to remind you that courage doesn't wait for the right age or the right moment. And we want to know where in the world our community is watching from, because we upload a new story just like this one every single day." Rook stood up slowly. His knee made the sound it always made now when he stood up quickly. He looked at the sign in Cora's hands and then out at the rally grounds behind him, at the 400 or so people scattered across the fairground, at the rows of motorcycles parked in the sun, at his brothers from the Sentinels clustered around their bikes 20 yards away, watching him with the patient attention of men who knew their road captain well enough to know that something had shifted. He turned back to Cora. "Stay right here. Don't move. I'm going to get some people." She blinked at him. "How many people?" He looked back at the rally. "All of them," he said. He walked back toward the Sentinels at a pace that wasn't quite a run but communicated urgency without panic, which was a specific gear he'd learned in the army and never lost. Ghost, the club's sergeant-at-arms, a thick-necked man with a shaved head and forearms covered in geometric tattoos, saw Rook's face and stood up straight from where he'd been leaning against his bike. "What's happening?" "Little girl at the fence. Her 7-year-old sister has been missing for 2 days. She rode her bicycle out here alone because she thought we could help search." Rook paused. "She's right. We can." Ghost looked at the fence, at the small figure standing there with her cardboard sign. He said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, "What do you need?" "Get Hatchet on the phone with the county sheriff's department. Find out where the command post is and what areas still need coverage. Get Decker to the main stage and have him get the MC announcer to cut the music. I need the whole rally to hear this." Ghost was already moving. Ghost was always already moving. It was what made him exceptional at his job. Rook went back to the fence and crouched down again. He looked at Cora and her sign, at the dried paint on her hand, at the way she was watching him with an expression that was half hope and half the particular wariness of someone who had been disappointed too many times in the past 48 hours to commit fully to optimism. "I need you to come inside the rally with me," he said. "I need you to show people that sign. Can you do that?" She looked down at the cardboard. The letters had smeared more in the heat. She looked back up at him. Yes. He found the fence entrance, a gap secured by a simple latch, and opened it for her. She walked through, carrying the sign in front of her like a small standard bearer, her sandals crunching on the gravel, her chin up in a way that suggested the chin-up was a decision she was actively maintaining. Rook walked beside her, and 4 of his brothers fell in behind them, because that was what sentinels did. You did not walk toward something difficult alone if a brother was nearby. The main stage was at the center of the fairground, and the blues band had just finished their sound check when Decker, the Sentinel's youngest full-patched member at 31 and their most naturally charismatic, appeared at the side of the stage and had a brief conversation with the event coordinator that ended with the coordinator nodding and handing Decker the microphone with the resigned expression of a man who understood that something had changed about the afternoon's agenda. Decker did not have Rook's gravity or Ghost's physical authority, but he had a voice that carried and a way of speaking that made people pay attention without feeling commanded. He stood at the center of the stage and looked out at the crowd and said simply, without preamble, "We need to stop for a minute. There's a little girl here who needs our help. I mean all of us. I need everyone to come toward the stage." The music had stopped and people turned in the way that crowds turn when a human voice carries a particular register of seriousness. Not alarm, not panic, but wait. People began moving toward the stage with their beers and their sunglasses and the relaxed posture of a summer afternoon that was in the process of becoming something else. Rook steered Cora through the gathering crowd to the front, and when Decker saw them approaching, he reached down and helped Cora up onto the stage with the careful efficiency of someone who understood they were handling something important. She stood up there with her sign and her yellow t-shirt and her tangled hair, and she was very small against the backdrop of the rally's banner in the afternoon sky, and the crowd that had gathered numbered somewhere around 400 people, and they all went quiet. Decker handed her the microphone. She held it with both hands and looked out at the sea of bikers and their families, and she said, in a voice that was steadier than anyone expected from a 9-year-old standing on a stage in front of 400 strangers, "My name is Cora Tillman. My little sister Lily is 7 years old, and she has been missing for 2 days. She disappeared from the community pool in town on Friday morning. She has dark hair and a gap in her front teeth, and she always carries a stuffed rabbit named Biscuit. The police are searching, but they need more help covering the roads and the fields and the creek areas around town. I came here because I thought maybe you could help. You have motorcycles. You can cover more ground than people walking. My sister's out there somewhere, and she's 7 years old, and she's scared." She stopped. She looked down at her sign. Then she looked back up. "Please," she said. The silence lasted about 2 full seconds. Then it ended. What happened in those next 2 seconds was not chaos. It was the opposite of chaos. It was the particular organized surge of a community that had been waiting, without knowing it, for something to do that mattered. 400 people did not erupt into noise and disorder. They leaned toward each other. They spoke in low, quick exchanges. Hands went to phones. Men who had been strangers an hour ago became a planning committee in real time, finding each other by the shared instinct of people who understood logistics because the road had taught them that improvisation without structure gets people killed. Rook had seen this phenomenon before at flood responses and accident scenes and the organized chaos of military operations, that specific moment when a group of individuals decides to become something larger than the sum of its parts. It always looked the same. It looked like this. Ghost appeared at Rook's elbow with information that had taken him less than 6 minutes to gather. He'd reached the county sheriff's deputy coordinating the search from the command post at the community center. The deputy's name was Okafor. He had confirmed that Lily Tillman was still missing, that official search teams had covered the pool area, the downtown streets, and the 2 nearest residential neighborhoods, and that the primary gaps in coverage were the creek corridor that ran northeast from the pool toward the Old Mill District, the stretch of rural highway between town and the interstate with its associated farmlands and drainage ditches, and a wooded area of about 80 acres on the east side of the county that bordered a private hunting property. Foot teams couldn't cover the rural highway efficiently. The wooded area required more people than the sheriff currently had available on a Saturday afternoon in summer when his department ran reduced weekend staffing. Rook absorbed this in the way he absorbed tactical information, completely and immediately, already converting it into movement and assignment before Ghost finished speaking. He turned to the stage where Decker still stood with Cora and the microphone and raised his hand. Decker saw it and held the microphone back out. "Listen up," Rook said, and his voice did not require volume to carry authority. People near the back leaned in without being asked. "We have 3 search zones that need coverage. Creek Corridor northeast of the pool, the rural highway between town and the interstate, and 80 acres of woodland on the East County line. The Sheriff's Department needs eyes, and they need them now. If you're willing to ride, I need you to stay. If you have children with you or medical conditions or reasons you can't participate in an active search, no one thinks less of you for staying here. But if you can ride, I need you to organize by zone." He named 3 assembly points within the fairground: Creek Corridor to the left of the main stage, highway route to the right, woodland search, which would require the most coordinated approach, directly in front. He told them Deputy Okafor was expecting them, and that Ghost would relay the precise coordinates for each zone within the next few minutes. He told them to stay in pairs minimum, to carry their phones with location services active, to call 911 immediately if they found anything, and to call Ghost's number, which Decker read out twice from the stage, if they needed coordination support. Then he looked at the crowd for a moment, at these 400 people in leather and denim and summer shirts, at the bikers and their families, and the vendors who had come out from behind their tables, and the band members who stood at the edge of the stage watching. He said the last thing and meant every word of it. "That little girl rode her bicycle 20 minutes on a country road alone to find help for her sister. The least we can do is ride." The fairground reorganized itself in 8 minutes. Rook had been at military operations that took longer to spin up. Later, when people tried to explain how it happened so efficiently, the most honest answer was that a rally full of motorcyclists was already a community in miniature. They already knew how to move in formation, they already understood roles and coordination, and the unspoken communication of people who had ridden together long enough to read each other through helmet glass at highway speeds. The skills that made them good riders made them good searchers. They knew how to cover ground. They knew how to communicate in conditions where you couldn't always hear each other. They knew how to keep track of where they'd been and where they hadn't. The highway route team assembled first, about 160 riders who would sweep the rural roads in both directions from town, riding slowly and systematically, pulling over at every lane and turnoff, checking ditches and culverts in the areas behind rural mailboxes where a small child might have wandered or been placed. The Creek Corridor team was smaller, around 90 riders who would park at access points along the creek bank and continue on foot, which many of them offered to do without being asked because they understood that motorcycles couldn't navigate creek beds. The woodland team was the largest, over 150, and the most complex because 80 acres of mixed forest required a grid approach that Rook sketched out on a napkin and photographed and sent to Ghost, who relayed it to Deputy Okafor, who gave it back to them with official blessing and the addition of 2 deputy units to anchor the operation. Cora stood beside Rook while this happened, still holding her sign, watching with the focused attention of a child who had learned in the past 48 hours not to let herself fully feel anything until she had reason to. She had stopped crying. Her face was doing the concentrated work of a person managing their own hope very carefully, not letting it get too large because large hope, when it collapsed, was harder to survive. Rook noticed this and said nothing about it. He just made sure she was standing in a spot where she could see what was happening, so that whatever she was feeling, it was anchored to something real and visible. 2 of the Sentinel's old ladies, a term used in motorcycle communities with straightforward affection for the partners of club members, had materialized from within the crowd. One of them, a stout woman named Patrice, who wore a blue bandana and had the efficient manner of someone who had organized many difficult things, crouched down next to Cora and offered her a bottle of water and a granola bar. The girl looked at the granola bar like she'd forgotten that food existed. "When did you last eat?" Patrice asked her. Cora thought about it. "Breakfast," she said, "before I left." Patrice looked at Rook. Rook nodded once. Patrice sat down on a nearby hay bale, and Cora sat beside her and ate the granola bar with the methodical focus of someone fueling for continued operation rather than pleasure. Rook's phone rang. Deputy Okafor. "Mr. Calloway, I have to tell you that in 15 years, I have never seen anything like what is currently deploying from your location. I've got a highway team checking in with my unit every 10 minutes. I've got a woodland team that just sent me a grid map. I have a creek team that found a shoe." Rook went still. "What kind of shoe?" "Child's shoe. Pink, Velcro closure, size approximately toddler. We need a family member to confirm. Is the sister available?" Rook looked at Cora, who was watching him with the same careful expression she'd had since the stage. He turned slightly away from her and lowered his voice. "How confident are you about the location?" "Creek corridor, about a quarter-mile northeast of the pool. The shoe was caught in some roots at the water's edge. There's no sign of entry into the water itself. That's the good news. There's a narrow path continuing northeast that the foot team is following now." The shoe could belong to any child, Rook told himself, and also knew that it probably didn't. He walked back to Cora and crouched down to her level again. He chose his words with the precision of a man who understood that what you said to a child in a moment like this mattered for a long time afterward. "The searchers found a shoe near the creek," he said. "It might be Lily's or it might not be. I need you to describe Lily's shoes for me." Cora did not hesitate. "Pink sneakers with Velcro. She has 2 Velcro straps. They have a little heart on the side. She got them for her birthday." Rook's throat tightened. He kept his face steady. "What size?" Cora thought. "I don't know the number. She's 7. They're small." He relayed this to Okafor. Okafor said he'd send a photo to Rook's phone in 2 minutes. 2 minutes later, the photo arrived. Rook looked at it for a moment, then he turned to Cora and held out the phone so she could see. She looked at the photo. She stopped breathing for a moment. "That's Lily's shoe," she said. Her voice came out very quiet. "That's the heart. She has a heart on the side. If this story is reaching something in you right now, if you believe that communities can still do extraordinary things when they choose to show up, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and share this video. We put out a new story every single day because we believe the world needs more of this, more proof that people are still good, more evidence that strangers can become heroes in the span of an afternoon." Rook was already back on the phone. "The shoe is confirmed. It belongs to the missing child. What's the status of the foot team on that northeast path? They're moving. They've got a deputy leading. The path goes about another 300 yards before it opens into an old orchard. There's a structure at the far end of the orchard, a storage shed. Looks like it hasn't been used in years. How far out are they? Maybe 5 minutes at current pace. We've got 2 more units converging from the east property line." "Keep this line open," Rook said. He stood and turned to Ghost, who was standing 3 feet away because Ghost always knew when to be 3 feet away. "Creek team found Lily's shoe. They're following a trail northeast toward an old orchard. There's a shed." Ghost's jaw set. "You need to be there. I need to be here with the girl." Ghost shook his head once, a small, efficient motion. "I'll stay with the girl. You go. You're the one she trusts." Rook looked at Cora, who was still holding the phone with the photo of the pink shoe, looking at it like she was trying to understand what it meant about the next few minutes of her life. He made a decision. He crouched down one more time and put a hand on her shoulder. "We found Lily's shoe near the creek. A team is following the path right now. I'm going to ride out there and I'm going to find out what's happening. Ghost is going to stay right here with you. He is my most trusted person. He is not going to leave your side." Cora looked at Ghost, who had moved forward and crouched down to her level with an expression on his usually severe face that Rook had never quite seen there before. Soft. Careful. Like he was aware of holding something that mattered. "I'm not going anywhere," Ghost told her. "I promise." Cora looked back at Rook. Her hands tightened on the phone. "Find her," she said. "Please find her." Rook stood, crossed to his Road King in 12 strides, and had the engine running by the time he swung his leg over. 3 sentinels fell in behind him without being asked. That was how it worked. You moved toward the thing that needed you, and your brothers followed, because that was the unspoken agreement you'd made when you put the patches on. They left the fairground at speed, 4 motorcycles going northeast through the summer afternoon, with the particular urgency of men who understood that somewhere ahead of them was a 7-year-old girl who had been alone for 2 days, who had a stuffed rabbit named Biscuit that she carried everywhere, who had a sister on a fairground behind them holding a cardboard sign made from trash and dried paint, and the particular courage of a 9-year-old who had done the math and decided that strangers with motorcycles were her best available option. The creek corridor road was narrow and unpaved, and the bikes kicked up dust as they went. Rook had the phone propped in his tank bag with Okafor on speaker, and he could hear the deputy's radio traffic in the background, the clipped exchanges of the foot team moving through the orchard toward the shed. He rode with one part of his mind on the road and the rest of it entirely focused on those voices in the background, listening for the specific change in tone that would tell him something had happened. He heard it at the 2-minute mark of the ride. A voice on the radio that had been flat and procedural suddenly went human. It said something he couldn't make out over the engine noise, and then it said it again louder, and Okafor made a sound on the phone that was not quite a word, just an exhale, the kind that comes out of a person when something they were afraid might never happen finally does. "Mr. Calloway," Okafor said. Rook's hand was already easing the throttle. "Yeah, we found her. She was in the shed." That was the detail that the foot team kept coming back to in the hours afterward, the way they'd find themselves stopping mid-sentence when they tried to describe it. She was just in the shed, sitting on the dirt floor in the back corner with her knees pulled up to her chest and Biscuit the stuffed rabbit pressed against her face. And when the deputy pushed the door open and the afternoon light came in at an angle across the floor, she looked up with eyes that had been in the dark for a long time and said, in a voice that was barely there, "Is Cora coming?" The deputy who found her, a young man named Torres who had been on the job for 14 months and would never forget this particular Saturday for the rest of his career, said yes. He said yes before he had any way to make it true, because some promises you make in the moment and figure out the logistics of later. He crouched down in the doorway of that shed and kept his voice very calm and told Lily Tillman that her sister had found a lot of people to help look for her and that she was safe now and that someone was going to take her to Cora right away. The girl looked at him for a long moment with the assessing gaze of a 7-year-old who had spent 2 days learning not to trust too quickly. Then she held out Biscuit, showing Torres the rabbit's worn ear, and said Biscuit was scared too. Torres said he understood, and the Biscuit was also safe now, and that was when Lily started to cry. Rook got there 4 minutes after the radio call. He parked the Road King at the edge of the orchard and walked the rest of the way through the long grass between the old trees, their branches heavy with unripe fruit, the afternoon light coming down through the leaves in the particular way it does in late July in Tennessee when the heat is still thick. But something in the quality of the light suggests that evening is thinking about arriving. He could see the cluster of deputies and the foot team members gathered around the shed entrance, and he walked toward them, and they made space for him the way people make space for someone who belongs in a moment. He stood in the shed doorway and looked at Lily Tillman, who was now sitting in Torres's arms, wrapped in an emergency blanket, her dark hair matted on one side where she'd been sleeping against the wall, her gap-toothed face blotchy from crying and streaked with dirt. She still had Biscuit. She looked smaller than 7 and also, somehow, older than 7 in the specific way that children look when they have been through something that children should not have to be through. She looked up at Rook. She took in the leather vest and the patches and the beard going silver at the jaw, and she said, without fear, "Are you one of the motorcycle people?" "Yes," he said. "I'm one of the motorcycle people. My sister found you." "She did," he said. "She was very brave." Lily considered this with the grave seriousness of a 7-year-old processing important information. She nodded slowly, like she was confirming something she had already believed to be true. "Cora is always brave," she said. "She's the bravest person." Rook's throat did the thing it did sometimes when he wasn't expecting it. He nodded back at Lily, matching her gravity. "Yeah," he said. "I think you're right about that." They brought Lily out of the orchard on a stretcher, a precaution given that she'd been without food and adequate water for 2 days, and had a slight fever that the EMTs noted with careful faces. She was not in danger. That was the word that moved through the assembled searchers and back to the fairground via Ghost's relay within minutes of her being found. She is not in danger. She is going to be fine. The physical relief of that sentence passing through 400 people who had spent the last several hours focused entirely on the possibility of the opposite outcome was a specific kind of communal exhale that Rook had experienced before, only in much darker contexts, in places far from Tennessee, where the outcome had not always been fine. He rode back to the fairground ahead of the ambulance because Cora needed to know before the ambulance arrived. He needed to be the one to tell her. She saw him coming from across the fairground. She was still with Ghost, who had not moved from the hay bale for the entirety of Rook's absence. Ghost had his phone out, and his hand resting near Cora's shoulder without touching it, the careful posture of a large man who understood the importance of proximity without pressure. The girl had her sign in her lap face down. At some point in the last hour, she had stopped needing to hold it up. She stood when she saw Rook walking toward her, and she went very still in the particular way that people go still when the next few seconds are going to determine something enormous. Her hands were at her sides, and her chin was doing the thing it had been doing all afternoon, that small, controlled trembling that meant she was actively choosing not to let it collapse. Rook stopped in front of her and crouched down and looked her in the eyes. "We found her," he said. "Lily is safe. She's coming here right now." Cora Tillman did not make a dramatic sound. She did not scream or crumple or collapse. She simply closed her eyes for one full second, and when she opened them again, there were tears running down her face in 2 straight lines, and she said, in the smallest voice he'd heard from her all day, "Is she okay?" "She's okay. She's tired, and she needs some food and some rest, but she's okay. She has Biscuit with her." A sound came out of Cora. Then that was not quite a sob, and not quite a laugh. It was something that existed in the space between those two things, the specific sound that relief makes when it has been held back long enough to build up real pressure. She pressed both hands over her mouth and the tears kept coming, and Ghost, this large and generally silent man whose road name suggested nothing gentle about him, put a hand very carefully on her shoulder and kept it there. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later. The fairground had been quiet in a particular way since Ghost's relay had gone out, not the quiet of a crowd waiting for something to happen, but the quiet of a crowd that had just participated in something and was still inside the feeling of it. People had not gone back to their beers or their conversations or the interrupted pleasure of the afternoon. They stood in loose groups near the main stage and in the rows between the bikes and at the edge of the parking area, and they waited, though many of them could not have explained precisely what they were waiting for, because the waiting felt important, and the thing they'd done together felt like something that deserved a moment of recognition before it became the past. When the ambulance pulled in and the back doors opened, and Torres stepped out first and then reached back in to help Lily down, the girl appearing in the ambulance doorway in her emergency blanket, with Biscuit held against her chest, and her gap-toothed face scanning the crowd with the particular focus of someone looking for one specific person, the fairground did something that fairgrounds almost never do. It went completely silent. And then Cora made a sound, one word, her sister's name, and she ran. Lily saw her coming and reached for her with both arms, nearly pulling Torres off balance in her urgency, and Cora hit her at full speed and wrapped around her, and they went down together onto the grass in a tangle of arms and emergency blanket and yellow t-shirt, and Biscuit fell somewhere in the process, but neither of them cared about Biscuit for the moment, and both of them were crying and saying each other's names and making the specific sounds that belong only to the reunion of people who love each other and have been afraid they wouldn't get to anymore. 400 people watched this happen in silence for about 10 seconds. Then, someone started clapping, and it spread the way applause spreads when it's genuine, not performance, moving through the crowd in a wave that built into something that was more than applause, that was release, that was 400 strangers processing the afternoon they'd just had together and finding that the only appropriate physical expression of it was this noise, this collective sound that rose up over the Tennessee fairground in the late afternoon, and went out across the fields and the creek corridor and the old orchard, where an empty shed still had a little girl's footprints in the dirt. Rook stood back and let the moment belong to the sisters. He had learned a long time ago that the most important thing you could do after doing the right thing was get out of the way and let the people it was done for have their moment without your presence complicating it. The girl's mother arrived 22 minutes later. Her name was Diane, and she had driven from the command post at a speed that Deputy Okafor had diplomatically chosen not to measure. And when she came through the fairground entrance and saw her daughters sitting together on the grass with an EMT kneeling beside them and Cora's arm around Lily's shoulders, she made a sound that everyone who heard it would remember. It was not a word. It was prior to words, beneath words, the sound that comes from a place in a person that only activates in the most extreme registers of human experience. She crossed the distance between herself and her daughters in a run and gathered both of them into her arms, and the three of them became a single shape on the grass, Diane's face buried in Cora's hair, her arms around both girls, Lily's small hand patting her mother's back in a gesture that was so unconsciously tender, so instinctively comforting, that several of the bikers standing nearby had to look at the sky or at their boots for a moment. Rook watched from a respectful distance and felt the thing he always felt at moments like this, a complicated mixture of gratitude and grief. Gratitude that it had ended here, in reunion, in this particular warm light on this particular grass. Grief, quieter and older, for all the times in his life and career when it had not ended this way, when the search had concluded differently and there was no ambulance arrival and no run across the fairground and no three-person shape on the grass. The grief did not diminish the gratitude. They coexisted the way they always had, the shadow that made the light visible. Diane Tillman looked up eventually and found Rook standing nearby, and she stood and came to him with both her daughters still attached to her, Cora on one side and Lily on the other. And she looked at him for a moment without speaking, because the words were somewhere underneath the feeling, and she couldn't get to them yet. "Your daughter came to us," he said, "so she wouldn't have to find them. She rode her bicycle 20 minutes on a country road alone, and stood at the fence with a sign she made herself. She got up on a stage in front of 400 strangers and asked for help. You raised someone extraordinary." Diane looked down at Cora, who was looking at the ground with the particular expression of a child who is absorbing a compliment that is too large to process in real time. "She never stopped," Diane said, her voice unsteady. "While I was at the command post, she kept saying there had to be more we could do. She kept looking at the map and asking why wasn't anyone on the roads farther out. She thought of this herself. She looked up the rally on my phone and she told me she was going to try to get people to help." "Did you know she was going to come here?" Rook asked. "I thought she meant she was going to call," Diane said. "I didn't know she got on her bicycle." She looked at her daughter with an expression that contained multitudes. "I'm going to have very strong feelings about that later. Right now I just feel grateful." Cora looked up and caught Rook's eye, and in her expression was the particular combination of satisfaction and exhaustion that belongs to someone who has completed a very difficult task that they had been not entirely certain they could complete. "You should know," he told her, "that what you did today was the bravest thing I've seen in a long time. And I've been in situations where people were being brave for a living." She looked at him seriously. Did it help? All the people searching? He thought about the creek corridor and the pink shoe caught in the roots and the foot team moving northeast through the orchard toward the shed. It was the searchers following the creek path who had found the shoe, and it was the shoe that had confirmed the direction, and it was the confirmed direction that had put Torres in front of that shed door at exactly the right moment. The chain of causation ran directly from a cardboard sign held up at a fence by a 9-year-old with dried paint on her hand. "It helped," he said. "It was exactly what she needed." That evening, as the rally reconvened in a quieter key, the blues band playing again, but softer now, the mood changed by the afternoon into something more reflective and more alive. At the same time, Rook sat on a hay bale near the main stage with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and thought about what the day had been. 400 people had left their afternoon and ridden out across 3 search zones because a child had asked them to. They had done it without hesitation and without drama and without requiring that anyone explain to them why it mattered. They already knew why it mattered. It mattered because a little girl was missing and a bigger girl had ridden her bicycle 20 minutes alone to find people who could help, and that kind of courage deserved a response proportional to its size. Ghost sat down next to him and they were quiet for a while, the comfortable quiet of men who had ridden enough miles together that silence required no explanation. She held that sign up for 40 minutes before you saw her, Ghost said eventually. Rook looked at him. How do you know that? She told me. While you were out at the orchard, she said she'd been standing at the fence for 40 minutes and people kept walking past and not stopping, and she was starting to think she'd made a mistake coming, that she should have thought of something better. Ghost paused. Then she said she saw you look up. Rook was quiet for a moment. 40 minutes, he said. Ghost nodded. She said she almost left twice, but she stayed because she didn't have another plan. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? That courage was not the absence of doubt, but the decision to remain at the fence anyway. That a 9-year-old girl with a cardboard sign and no guarantee that anyone would stop had stood in the sun for 40 minutes because her sister was out there somewhere and she had run out of other options. And this was the thing she had to try. That 400 people had responded not because they were heroes in any formal or decorated sense, but because the road had taught them something about showing up, about the difference between seeing something that needed doing and actually doing it. That the most important searches are sometimes not the ones with official backing and organized resources, but the ones that begin when a child holds up a sign and one person decides to stop. The Blue Ridge Sentinels established something in the months after that afternoon. They called it the Rally Network, a coordination system through which motorcycle events across the region could be rapidly converted into search and support operations in the event of local emergencies. They worked with county sheriff departments in 4 states to formalize the communication channels so that what had happened through improvisation and a borrowed microphone could happen faster and more efficiently if it was ever needed again. They trained club members in basic search grid methodology and created a contact protocol that could deploy within minutes of receiving a call. In the first 2 years, the network activated 3 times. Once for a missing elderly man with dementia who had wandered from a care facility near a rally site in Virginia. Once for a flash flood in North Carolina, where a rally's worth of riders became an impromptu evacuation and supply transport operation for a rural community cut off by washed-out roads. And once for a missing child situation in Georgia that resolved in 4 hours with the child found safe. In no small part because 112 bikers had been parked 2 miles from the search perimeter when the call went out and had been in position before the official expanded search had fully organized. Cora Tillman sent Rook a letter 3 months after the rally. She had written it by hand on notebook paper in the careful, rounded letters of a 4th grader who had been told by her teacher that the letter was a writing assignment, but had privately decided that the assignment was just a good excuse to do something she already wanted to do. She told him that Lily was doing okay and was back in school and was sleeping in her own bed again and had started leaving Biscuit on her pillow during the day instead of carrying him everywhere, which Cora said was a good sign. She told him that she'd given a presentation about the rally to her class and that her teacher had cried a little, which had embarrassed the teacher, but which Cora thought was a reasonable response. At the bottom of the letter, in slightly larger letters, as though she had written it last and with particular intention, she had written, "I was scared that no one would stop, but you stopped. I want to be someone who stops." Rook had the letter framed. It hung in the Blue Ridge Sentinels clubhouse next to the rally photo that someone had taken from the stage. The wide shot of 400 people gathered in the summer afternoon at the moment Cora had said please into the microphone, her yellow t-shirt and her cardboard sign visible at the center of the frame, the crowd spreading out around her in every direction like something growing from a single point. Underneath the photo, someone had written a caption on a strip of white tape. It said, "She held the sign up for 40 minutes. Be the person who stops." When Lily turned 10, the Tillman family drove to Asheville, and the Blue Ridge Sentinels threw her a birthday party at the clubhouse with a custom cake and a banner and Biscuit propped in a place of honor at the center of the table. Lily wore a little leather vest that the club's old ladies had made for her, child-sized with a single patch on the back that showed a rabbit. She rode on the back of Rook's Road King for 20 minutes through the mountain roads outside Asheville, with a helmet that was slightly too large, wobbling on her head, and both arms wrapped around Rook's midsection, and a laugh that carried over the engine noise and out across the hills. Cora stood at the side of the road and watched her sister ride away on the motorcycle and then come back, and the expression on her face was the one she'd been working toward all along, through the 40 minutes at the fence, and the stage, and the cardboard sign, and the dried paint on her hand. It was the expression of someone who had done the thing they set out to do, who had stood at the fence long enough, who had found the right person to stop, who had spoken clearly into the microphone and asked for what her sister needed. It was not relief anymore. It was something past relief. It was the quiet, permanent knowledge that she had done it, that she had stood there and held the sign up, and someone had looked up from what they were doing and seen her, and that everything that followed had followed from that one moment, those first 40 minutes of standing at the fence when no one stopped, and then the moment someone did. Thank you for watching this story. If it reminded you that courage is not about certainty but about staying at the fence anyway, that communities are capable of extraordinary things when one person asks clearly and loudly enough, and that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply stop and look at what someone is holding up for you to see, please share this video and subscribe to this channel. We upload a new story every single day because we believe that stories like this one matter, that they remind us what people are actually capable of when they choose to show up. Tell us in the comments where you watch this from and what time it is there, because our community is everywhere, and every one of you who watched until the end is proof that people still stop, people still look up, people still care, and that, above everything else, is worth saying out loud.